Hello everybody and welcome to part 20 something of my Fire Emblem 6 hard mode chapter guide. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 17, but the Sacae side of chapter 17. So last time we finished all the Iliad chapters, so if you're curious about any of them, feel free to go back and take a look at that. We also did a video that was sort of comparing and contrasting the different route split options in the individual chapters. So if you're curious about what route split you might want to do, that's also a decent resource to look at. I would say generally people have agreed that Ilia is the easier side of the route split, and I would also agree with this. Sacae is certainly not impossible, and we will talk about how to do the chapters in the next couple of episodes, but it is a little bit more challenging and a little bit more annoying. There's sort of two reasons for this, I would say. Number one is that there's a lot more like gimmicky chapters. This chapter isn't that bad. It is a Fog of War chapter, but there's not really any gimmicks going on here, which is kind of nice. The second part is the primary enemy we're going to be fighting are nomads, nomad troopers, as opposed to Ilia, where you fight Pixie Knights and Falcon Knights. And nomads and nomad troopers are definitely a lot more annoying to deal with, mostly just because they're really fast, and it makes hit rates in this game that are already really bad way worse. So it's just really like tedious to get through a bunch of nomads. This chapter isn't too bad. As you can see, there's only a few nomads and some nomad troopers, but it can definitely get annoying and will get annoying as we progress. Most nomads and nomad troopers only have short bows, which are actually just sort of weaker iron bows. It does give them a little bit of crit, but really high defense characters, specifically if you want to look at someone like Douglas, can actually be fairly helpful during different parts of Sacae, because again, they're just not very strong. But they will pick you apart because, again, it's really hard to like thin a bunch of nomads because it's really hard to hit them and double them, and you can definitely take chip damage that will add up over time. But in any case, let's talk about this chapter in particular. It's a pretty straightforward chapter. As I said, it is a Fog of War chapter, so be aware of that. There are two villages. My recommendation for how to handle the chapter would be to just kind of beeline for the boss. You can go straight right from the start, where you can see that sage and some forest tiles. I would not recommend doing this. I would also not recommend splitting your army. I would recommend going down to the south, get the house, and then just go across the bridge and go straight for the boss. There are two houses on this map, neither of which are very useful. The one in the top right has Eclipse. Eclipse is the Dark Magic Siege Tome. You probably experienced this throughout the game. It always puts the enemy or the unit to 1 health, which seems pretty powerful, but as you've seen throughout the game, probably it has atrocious hit. There's pretty much no way to hit consistently with this thing, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. I would just abandon that house. Honestly, it's pretty tough to get unless you can catch that thief you can see in the middle. The other house is the Tina staff, which is basically just a men's staff. Also not very useful, but that's kind of where you want to go anyways. So it's just a free men's staff. But yeah, we'll talk about it a little bit more specifically when you get into the chapter, but just looking at it from a whole, that is the recommendation that I would use to handle this chapter. One of the things I'll mention right off the bat is that the boss, as you can see, is fairly unprotected. There's a couple of wyverns next to him, but once you get across there, it's pretty easy to kill him. Part of, I think, what the chapter wants you to do is, even if you take the route I suggested, you still have to go over that bridge in the top. And there you encounter some more units. There's some wyverns that'll range you and a ballista. But you really don't have to do that because you can just there's a lot of units that can just cross the water. For example, like Shin or Su, who you've probably trained if you're in Sacae, or Milady. So you don't have to deal with a lot of that stuff. You can just skip it altogether. So again, that would be my recommendation for this chapter. Okay, so I just wanted to touch on the preps really quick, and then we'll get this chapter started. So you don't really need any like specific characters or anything. There's no one to recruit on this chapter. As I said, it is a Fog of War chapter, so I would recommend bringing a thief, Estelle being generally the best. I also just wanted to mention a couple of different characters. This is a different file than the one that I had on Ilia, so I trained Shin more than I did in the other file. As you can see, he's really strong. He'll be pretty consistently that strong. I also trained Gonzalez, who actually has a lot more skill than he usually gets, but can also be a beast. As I said, this is the file that came out of the route split, the first route split, where you get Gonzalez as like a level 5 unit or something, so it's a lot easier to... It's not a lot easier to train him, but it's a lot better to train him. I also wanted to show Trek and just how bad he is. I actually gave him 2 speed wings, and he's this bad, so... I know we already mentioned don't train Trek, but yeah, I would not recommend it. Yeah, I just want to show that off. When we actually get to the gameplay, the units are going to look a little different because, again, this is a different file. But yeah, for the most part, we're just going to want to go down here, as I said, and then cut across here, and then the boss will be here. So pretty straightforward, and I'll start skipping around from here on out. Okay, so there's a few things that I wanted to mention here. Number one is I just wanted to show off what these nomads look like. As you can see, they do have 17 speed. This guy's got 16 speed. This guy's got 18. So they're not like capped, but they are pretty darn fast. And as you can see as well, they have 17 crit. But the 18 attack is pretty darn weak. A lot of our units, like Alan already has 14 defense, he has 15. So we're not going to be taking that much. But as you can see, actually 82 is pretty high. But the percentages are not going to look that fantastic, especially if you want to like attack at range. One of the things about this game is, as good as 2 range still is, because it's always great, it's a little bit inconsistent. And this is part of why Sacae is so annoying, is because, like, even though the 82 from the sword looks really good, if we want to actually, like, enemy face some damage, we're going to be looking at, like, 50%. And you're not going to get much better than that. Percival's skill isn't amazing, but it's not terrible. The other thing I wanted to mention is that even though I wouldn't recommend sending anybody up here, you are still going to kind of have to worry about these guys, because the mages and the sage that we saw at the beginning are going to be pushing toward your army. So, again, you don't necessarily need to leave anyone up there. Just having Lou in the back of our army to kind of take these guys out as they progress is totally fine. But just be aware that you won't be able to, like, just... It's not like they're never going to push. Okay, so there's just a few more things that I want to mention here. One of them is that we did look at those wyverns spawn around here. So just don't be surprised by them. The fog of war can definitely get you, so be aware of that. There's also ballistas. They are manned, so, again, be aware of that. But the big thing I want to talk about is that nomads can travel over water. I mentioned this with Sue and Shin being able to transport Roy over here to seas. But just be aware that, like, you won't be able to use this bridge as a choke point. This guy can range all over here. So at the moment, it's not going to be too difficult for our team to be able to kind of bulldoze through this. But if you're using a bit of a weaker team, this chapter, especially around here, can definitely be a pain with all these wyverns coming at you and with these guys being able to go over the waters. One more thing I wanted to mention is reinforcements. They start fairly early in this chapter. I think on like turn 6 or something along those lines. And they can start from over here, and they spawn from up here. So just be aware, they are just cavaliers, so I wouldn't worry too much about them. But just be aware that they start fairly early in this chapter, so you may have to contend with them even if you're moving pretty darn fast. Okay, so we're pretty close to being done with the chapter at this point. As I said, this chapter is pretty straightforward. I think it's only like turn 7, something along those lines. Actually, it's exactly turn 7, that's why I looked at that. As you can see, I did have Lou stand on a mountain here. You don't necessarily have to do this, but I figured he wasn't going to be able to get to the boss. You can absolutely go through this bridge tile up here, but as I said, you don't really have to, because again, Shin or Sue, if you trained her, and any of your flyers can get across the river. I got Roy over here. The boss himself is fairly tough. He's slow, which is nice, but he has a lot of strength, and just by proxy of being on a gate and having 17 speed and 15 17 luck and 15 speed means that hitting him is fairly difficult. But he's not too bulky, so he's not that tough, but you will obviously have to have a plan for him in the end. But yeah, as I said, this chapter is pretty darn straightforward. So I'll go ahead and finish this boss here. I'm curious how my Shin looks fighting him. Yeah, pretty darn good. As I said, I believe it's on turn 6 to 8 or something along those lines. The calves do spawn from here, so you do kind of have to contend with them. But it's not too much, so it shouldn't be too much of a hassle. Just be aware, as I said, I did skip through a lot of this chapter, and it was pretty straightforward with me because a lot of our units are pretty darn strong. But this area right here is not easy. There are a lot of wyverns. The nomads can be really annoying, especially if they go on these mountain tiles here. They can be really annoying, so just don't take this chapter like super lightly, but it is a fairly straightforward one. Alright, so we got a couple hits with Shin, including a crit, which was able to deal with the boss pretty easily. And we're ready to seize. I don't think there's a ton else to talk about. As I said, there are some reinforcements. But the nice thing about this route is that, this route through the chapter, I should say, is that you don't have to deal with a lot of the reinforcements. You don't have to deal with basically any of the stuff up here. So let's go ahead and seize, and the chapter is done. As I said, this is one of the more straightforward Sacae chapters. They are going to get a lot more annoying, particularly in this one, the Law of Sacae, but we'll talk about that one next time. So as always, I hope everybody enjoyed, and I will see you next time.